Hi, my name is Heather Alec-Navage, and welcome to the 23rd Annual Fall for the Book Festival. These are free online events run the last 2 weeks of October and can be rewatched anytime on Crowdcast or on our YouTube channel. To follow us on Crowdcast, click the Fall for the Book icon above this window, and then click follow or subscribe on YouTube, and the link will be in the chat. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Nicole Lynn Lewis. Nicole serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Generation Hope, an organization that she founded in March of 2010, and she's the author of the memoir, Pregnant Girl. She has given 2 TEDx talks and speaks at schools, colleges, and youth and teen support organizations all across the country. Hi, Nicole, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Heather?
We're great. We're here to talk about your book, Pregnant Girl.
Yes.
So I'm going to just ask you some questions and then you can talk about the book and we'll just take it from there.
Awesome.
So what inspired you to write your personal experiences in this book? And did you have any reservations about sharing the good and the bad sides of your story?
Yeah, so I decided to write Pregnant Girl for a couple reasons. One, I think many people feel like they understand and know, all the ins and outs around teen pregnancy, and most of what people know is pretty inaccurate and based on really damaging stereotypes around this issue. And the second reason was, I think not enough people are talking about the success of parenting students in particular, the fact that young parents can go on after a teen pregnancy and go to college, complete high school, and move into family-sustaining careers with the proper supports. And those 2 things really kind of drove me and fueled my fire to write the book. What I knew pretty early on was that it was going to be important for me to be transparent about my own journey as a young mom. There are some universal truths that I think are really important for people to feel a connection to in order to really start to care about these issues. So, being honest about some of the challenges that I had as in my childhood around my family and the emotional kind of turbulence that I experienced was really important because there are so many people who can identify with that. They may not have experienced a teen pregnancy, but they did have, kind of emotional upheavals or trauma as a young person that contributed to, where they are today. And so really being honest about the difficult things that I had been through was important to create those connections that I think are really imperative to people saying, this is something that I can identify with, and this is something I understand, and therefore I want to do something about. So it was hard. It was really difficult to walk through those moments that that you may not want to think about anymore. And to try to put yourself in those moments again so that you can really describe them to the reader. But I do think it was really important for people to feel connected to the story and ultimately connected to the issues.
Yeah. And I liked that you tied in your personal stories. And then you also shared a lot of statistics and data and information about student parents. So it was kind of a walk through your own situation, but then pairing that with what's actually happening in the world of student parents today. Yeah. So what would you say was the hardest part of the book to write? And how did you overcome some of those creative challenges?
I think the hardest part of writing the book is exactly what you just described. How do you weave your personal story in with the larger the contextualized information, the data? Data isn't always sexy. It's not always, it doesn't keep a reader on the edge of their seat. And so I think trying to, really help people to understand, bring them into the story, have them really feel a part, have them experiencing things with me, sort of keeping them on the edge of their seats, but then weaving in a statistic that really drives home the fact that this was not just difficult for me to graduate from college, but, here are the statistics about, young parents more broadly. I think that was a big challenge, making sure that I still kept readers engaged while sharing the data and weaving that in throughout the story. But I've heard really great feedback from folks that I did it successfully. So all of those 3 a.m. writing sessions were worth it.
That's awesome. So, a lot of people go through something like what you went through and say, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to change this. I'm going to make a difference. So, at what point did you know that? I mean, you talk about a little bit in the book about starting Generation Hope, but did you have inspiration for starting Generation Hope back when you were a student dealing with all of, these hardships?
One thing that I think, I really try to tell people is like, I never envisioned myself as a CEO of anything, never mind a nonprofit. I just didn't really see myself in that role. And so back in college, the daily exercise was just, how do I get through the next 24 hours? How do I feed my child? How do I stay in school? How do I keep a roof over our heads? Gas in the car, like all of those very basic things. And when I thought about my career, I was really motivated by like, what will I be able to get quickly and be able to feed my child and pay for childcare? Like, that's what I thought about. I remember thinking in college, it shouldn't be this hard. I remember thinking in college, there are some tangible solutions that would make this easier for me and probably make this easier for so many other young parents. And when I graduated from college, I just felt this tremendous sense of like, I want to give back. I want to try to do something for other young parents. People would tell me over the years, oh, maybe you should start a nonprofit. Again, I felt like that's for those people, over there. I'm not a nonprofit founder or CEO. But I think the fact that there wasn't an organization doing this work in the DC region, coupled with, being a little bit removed from college and reflecting back on my experience, reflecting back on why I had been through all of that I had been through, I really felt like there was a reason, there was a reason that I had some really tough times, and every day was that daily exercise. And I thought, you know what, I feel like this is a calling for me. This is something that I'm being called to do, because I have this lived experience that I can bring to the table that I think could be really beneficial in imagining what could be in place as a nonprofit organization to really advance this work. So I didn't envision myself running a nonprofit in college, but I envisioned a better situation that maybe I could contribute to in some way.
Yep, that's awesome. And so how about the Generation Hope Scholars? What kind of feedback have you gotten from them since you released the book? And I'm guessing that some of them have probably read it. I mean, are you hearing from some of your students?
Yeah, so we gave books to all of our students. We have 122 students currently in the program, and we'll be growing that over the years, the next 3 years. But what I've loved is seeing them circle and highlight certain excerpts from the book and sharing it either with me personally or on social media and being like, oh my gosh, this is something I've wanted to voice, but haven't had the words to kind of articulate it, whether it was how hard it is, being a teen parent, the judgment that they've experienced, the stigma that they've experienced, the, unnecessary hurdles to getting supports. I think that's my favorite thing is like, whenever I see someone like totally circling, underlining, parts in the book, especially our scholars and student parents, even across the country, that is such a good feeling, because what has been really clear, and one of the other reasons I wrote the book was, this story has been silenced, and the people have been made to feel like they can't tell their stories. That shame and that stigma around teen pregnancy is so significant, that I've seen people, our students, people outside of our program moved to tears by parts of the book, because for so long they've been made to feel like they can't talk about this. And so that was a big thing for me, my nervousness around, I hope this honors people's journeys who have experienced this, because of the fact that they have been made to feel like they can't share it.
I think it's important to share those stories too, because like you said, not many people know, and people don't they just assume that a teen mom is, not going to go to college. And so
Right.
here you are, and you've shown that it can be done. It was a struggle. And now you've found ways to kind of bridge those difficulties to make it a little bit easier for students to stay in school.
Right.
So George Mason University has student parents. And I know that we have a new partnership in the Family U cohort. So I wondered if maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to be partnering with George Mason, which is an alma mater of mine. I got my master's degree at George Mason University back in 2006. And we currently support students who are scholars and pursuing degrees at George Mason. So it's been wonderful to kind of take that relationship to the next level with our Family U program. And so Generation Hope has been doing direct work with parenting students and teen parents over the past 11 years. And we've, as I said, supported students at George Mason as well as 20 different 2- and 4-year schools across the DC metro region. And what we've observed in that time is that higher ed really has a long way to go in terms of supporting this population and making sure that they have the resources and the tools and the information to really make it to the graduation stage. 1 in 5 undergraduate students across the country is parenting, and that's a significant population, but in higher ed, they're really invisible. And so Generation Hope realized that we had kind of amassed these best practices in terms of how to support this population and get them to the graduation stage over our 10 plus years. And we had the opportunity to really be a thought partner with colleges and universities locally and across the country. And so we developed a capacity building program called Family U. And it includes a cohort experience where we're working with a select group of colleges and universities over 2 years to really help them implement successful student parent supports, really creating family-friendly campuses that embrace this population, value this population, and help them experience success. And George Mason is in our inaugural cohort, along with 3 other really amazing institutions: Montgomery College, Trinity Washington University, and Northern Virginia Community College. And it's just been awesome to work together to kind of see where each institution is in terms of their student parent work, and then to be able to help them in moving that work forward and saying, what are your high priority areas and how can we be helpful to you in advancing that work? And one of the really exciting components of the program is that in year 2, we have a student parent fellow who becomes a key member of that implementation team at that institution. And the idea, everything we do at Generation Hope is centered on student parent voice. We want our students driving the work and driving the conversations in terms of informing us about what really needs to happen. And so it's exciting now to have that also be a component of Family U and really be able to train, compensate, and support student parents as experts around the table. So we're just so excited to be partnering with George Mason and the other institutions in Family U and to take the work to the next level.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So would you say that George Mason is known as a family-friendly campus, or do we have some work to do?
I think that George Mason is known as a campus that really is working to address equity issues. And I think that student parents is emerging as a population that George Mason is really starting to say, hey, we want to be at the forefront of this. We want to be really a model for other institutions and how to do this work. Like many institutions across the country, even getting the work started around collecting data around how many student parents do you have on your campus. We've seen really promising things coming out of George Mason that other institutions across the country aren't even doing yet, but George Mason, and I think the folks in our Family U program would be the first to tell you that they have a lot of work to do when it comes to, collecting student parent data, really looking at their policies and practices through the student parent lens, and creating a culture that's more embracing of families and of this population.
That's awesome. So we have that to look forward to at George Mason.
Yeah.
So going back to the book, so you talk a lot about your daughter, Narissa, who was your baby that you had while you were at William and Mary. And so I'm curious about Narissa today and what she thought about the book. So how old is she now, and what is she doing these days, and what did she think of Mom's book?
So she's 22. She's not the little almost 3 month old that she was when I started at William and Mary. She's actually in her senior year of college now herself. She's a marketing major and is, right at the cusp of about to start her own career, and she's really excited about that and doing internships and I think it's been a surreal experience to support her in her own college journey, just knowing that we were in college together. I remember dropping her off freshman year, at her dorm, and just getting emotional, just thinking about the fact that she was embarking on this journey that had been so pivotal in both of our lives, when I was starting out. And she actually hasn't read the book. And I think part of that is because it's kind of hard. There are some things in the book that I think, she probably would want to sit with for a little while and be prepared to kind of process and absorb. And that's okay. I'm totally 100% in support of whenever she feels like she's ready to read it. Like I'm 100% there for her to do that. She's very, very proud, and she's helping me to try to figure out how to do TikTok videos and, share it on social media. Cause I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to TikTok, but yeah, she's very proud of me. And she's been like one of my biggest cheerleaders on it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how about your parents? You talk about your parents, and I love the determination, like that you were just like, no, Mom, I'm going to go to college. Don't worry. This is my dream. I'm going to do this. And you said, you had your scholars moved to tears. I wasn't even a, teen mom, but I was definitely moved to tears reading this book. It's very honest and very open, and I just really, I'm so proud of you for sharing, your bravery and all the stuff that you went through. I think, will really help other women who can identify with this type of situation. So, and now I don't even know where I was going with my question, but but yeah, I was talking about your parents.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I've had people on social media write like I was crying when I was reading it, and I'm like, I was crying when I was writing it, so we were all crying together. My parents are great. I'm very close, particularly with my mom. She really fell in love with Narissa as soon as she was born. She was in the labor and delivery room with me when I gave birth to her. And, from that moment on, it was like a love fest between her and Narissa. And she's just been an amazing support in not only Narissa's life, but in my life and in our, we have 4 more children now, my husband and I. And so, very close to my mom. And I think, it's been just a really wonderful experience, I think, for our family, as crazy as that sounds. Narissa kind of brought to light a lot of things that we probably wouldn't have dealt with or talked about as a family for a long time. And it almost was like my teen pregnancy really forced us to have those conversations and really face and deal with those things. And made me reflect on the kind of parent that I wanted to be to her. So, but yeah, my parents were very close. As I say in the book, they live like 15 minutes away from me.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
That's nice. It's good for your kids too.
Yes.
To have that relationship with their grandparents. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So going back to Generation Hope, there was an article in Inside Higher Ed where you talk about of course we have talked about the pandemic, because
Yes.
I envisioned this event being in person where you could read from your book and do a book signing, and here we are in Zoom. So you talk a little bit about the effect that the pandemic had on student parents and the stressors and, the sort of mental hardship of everybody being at home, virtual, trying to do school and have your kids doing school. So what kinds of supports did Generation Hope offer through that, whole time? What is it? Almost 2 years now.
I know. It's like, what is time anymore? Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really a big headline that we've tried to really stress to folks throughout the pandemic is that student parents, teen parents were already in crisis way before COVID-19 even, hit. And so, now over the past year and a half, 18 plus months, all of the things that they were experiencing prior, from food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation challenges, unemployment, all sorts of things, those things have just been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I think we've talked a lot in the pandemic about different populations being disproportionately impacted, but we almost talk about them in silos. It's like communities of color, folks who were homeless, domestic violence, people who are experiencing domestic violence, people who may have mental health challenges, and first generation college students, Black and brown mothers. What we really want people to understand is that student parents are at the epicenter of all of those different populations that we talk about. They're more likely to be, essential workers. They're more likely to be low-income college students and first-generation college students. So they're experiencing the pandemic with layer upon layer of those identities and those challenges that we know have made it nearly impossible to stay afloat, throughout the pandemic. Thankfully, Generation Hope has been a holistic wraparound model since our inception. And I think that goes to the importance of organizations having folks with lived experience at the helm, whether it's on the board, whether it's in the leadership team, because my lived experience and all of the difficulties I had in college really informed the way that we support our students. So there's nothing our students can really bring to us that we say, oh, that's not something we handle. We have helped our students through domestic violence crises. We've helped them apply and renew for DACA status. We can proofread an English paper on Wednesday and then go with a scholar to court on Thursday to support them through, getting an order of protection. So there's really nothing that's off the table. And that's because what I learned in my own experience was that it wasn't the academic side of things that made college so difficult for me as a parenting student. It was life. It was, I need to keep a roof over our heads. I'm in this domestic violence relationship. I don't have enough food to eat, for both my daughter and I. And so what we've done in the pandemic is we've taken all of those holistic wraparound supports and we've just heightened our support and stepped it up a notch. So for example, we've always provided emergency funding to our scholars with a very quick 72-hour turnaround time whenever they have a crisis. What we did is we said, we know that they're going to have even more financial hardship. We're going to give them COVID-19 emergency grants on top of our regular emergency funding, where they can all they have to do is say, yes, I'd like it. And we send it to them, no questions asked. We've given out $60,000 in those COVID grants on top of the emergency funding that we normally give. Another example is we have a mental health manager on staff at Generation Hope, and she provides one-on-one therapy sessions as well as group therapy sessions to our scholars and their children. We saw a 30% increase in the number of sessions our scholars requested with her. And so we stepped up, the supports in terms of our mental health. So all of that has been critical. We've seen the headlines about first generation college students, low income college students, students of color, not re-enrolling, not being able to stay in college throughout this pandemic. About 85% of our students have stayed enrolled or graduated over the past 18 plus months. So that's really a testament to the fact that these supports matter and that these supports really do help students, particularly those with children, make it to the finish line.
Yeah, I think that's so great. I mean, your organization is just helping so much with these students. So how was it to have your book reviewed by the New York Times?
I mean, absolutely insane. I talked about this, when we got the New York Times review. I was not only blown away by the review, it was just a rave review, and it just captured so much of what I hoped people captured from the book. But, I tried to launch this book into the world about 13 years ago, and I had agents and publishers tell me, you don't have a platform, no one wants to hear about teen parents being successful. This would never sell. People would never buy it. And to have release it out into the world and have the New York Times do such a positive review that really just felt so validating, that was huge. And I think it proves that, when you have a vision for something, when you believe wholeheartedly in something, there are going to be people along the way who are going to say, no, and you've just got to keep going forward and pushing to get it out into the world. But yeah, it was a definite pinch myself moment.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So for those of you who haven't read the book yet, and we're going to move to some audience questions, there's a green button on your screen where you can buy the book. Yeah. And you see I have mine flagged. I actually wrote a paper based on this book over the summer. So it was very awesome. Good resource. Excellent story. So the other thing is, if you have questions, you can share them in the chat. And our first question is actually somebody who wants to know a little bit more about your personal story. So I guess we just dove right in and didn't really talk about like what the book is really all about. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a college-bound honor roll student, AP classes, just knew that college was the next step for me after high school. My parents, I was raised in a middle-class two-parent home. Both my parents are college educated, very much raised my sister and I to know that education was important and to know that college was a definite in terms of our future. And I also grew up in a household where there was a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing, almost on a daily basis. And that definitely impacted me in a variety of ways. And I found myself in high school really in a turbulent relationship, and in a relationship that resulted in a pregnancy. And so, here I was, I had just been accepted into several different colleges and I had this positive pregnancy test. And it was really hard to see how those two things could coexist and how I was going to be able to go to college as a mom. I also, didn't have anybody in my community or school or neighborhood who got pregnant and went to college. Like that just didn't happen. A girl in that situation usually disappeared. You didn't see her anymore, or she was working, retail, food service, something like that. She certainly wasn't going to college. So, but I think even then I knew that education was really critical for me to be able to provide for this baby that I was now going to be taking care of. And so I started college when my daughter was a little under 3 months old, and nothing about my life said college. I was homeless for periods of time. I didn't have food to eat always. When I found out I had gotten into William & Mary, I was 8 months pregnant, living day to day in a Motel 6. I mean, there was never a guarantee that I was going to make it. And Pregnant Girl is really about my journey and trying to make it, and the daily struggles of that, as well as the larger issues that make it so hard for teen parents and parenting students all over the country to actually make it. So hopefully that provides a little bit of a synopsis.
Read the book. It's so good. It's a great book. So I'm going to call out William & Mary a little bit because I did some research, and so William & Mary offered some family housing for you that helped. And also I think your daughter went to their child development center. So sadly, those options really aren't available anymore for undergrads from the people I talked to over there. So what would you offer to campuses that want to try to improve or step up their services to student parents? I mean, is family housing really the most important, or where would you say is the kind of most important area?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. Let me just say that the family housing at William & Mary was not intended for undergrads, even when I went there. So I had to find a loophole. It was really intended for adjunct and assistant professors with, families. And I had to say, it doesn't say that an undergraduate, with a baby can't live there. And so it was definitely not at all a support that was intended for undergrads. And even the childcare center on campus was not intended for undergrads. I was the only undergraduate student who was bringing their child to that child care center. It was mostly professors, faculty, staff that was using it. And unfortunately, for those institutions that do have child care centers on campus across the country, even today, that's the case typically, is that it's not really for students. I think, there's so much work that needs to be done around student parent supports. The biggest ones are housing and childcare in terms of solutions that could be really beneficial to students. I don't remember exactly if this is accurate, but I think it's like 8% of colleges and universities across the country have family housing that's available to student parents. So we're talking very, very slim options for parenting students when it comes to housing solutions. And childcare, similarly, I think it's about 50% of 2 and 4 year schools have childcare centers on campus, but that doesn't speak to whether those are accessible to students. And so that's, just 50% have childcare on campus, and most of those centers might be really utilized by staff and faculty. So I think really for colleges and universities, thinking about what is feasible in terms of answering those two questions around housing and childcare. A lot of times we'll talk to institutions and we'll say, it's so expensive to build a child care center. There's so many liability issues and insurance and all of those things. One of the things that we do at Generation Hope that we talk to institutions about is we provide monthly stipends for our scholars to use in the community to access high quality childcare. So one, we help them identify high quality childcare that's convenient to them, that's in their community, and then we give them stipends that they can use. So that's an option, for example, that colleges can think about is, does it have to be the traditional brick and mortar childcare or housing, or are we looking at something where we can provide stipends, remove those financial barriers to those supports that are really critical for helping them to get to the graduation stage? So it's hard to say which one is the biggest, because those are the two biggest. And I think right now in COVID, on any given day, it shifts, housing with evictions and all of the things that we're seeing that are, starting to trend back to where they used to be, or the supports are kind of being reversed because people see the light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic. Housing is becoming, at times your biggest hurdle. And then again, childcare with the pandemic has also been really just totally interrupted. So it depends on, what day and who you're talking to. Both of those are critical.
Yeah, I think so too. I think anytime that you can reduce the stress of the other things, that will help a student be able to focus and move to I feel like, in our student parents that we've talked to at Mason, they're semester to semester. Exactly. I'm here now, this is going well, but I don't know what's going to happen next semester.
Yeah.
So we have another question from the audience. This person says, you are a role model for women who have had children in their teens, but you're also a role model for your own children. And they're saying, how has she responded, but any of your children responded to your success?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm a mother of 5. I tell people that's my full-time job, really, is wrangling 5 children. Our oldest, Narissa, is 22, and all the way down to our youngest, who's 5 months old. Narissa, as I said, I think she's just been really supportive of the whole thing, but I think it also instilled in her the importance of education at a very young age. And she just always knew that college was in her future. And she always knew the importance of fighting for the things that you believe in, even when the world, can say otherwise. And for our other children, I think that's been really important. We have a 12-year-old who's in 7th grade, and she has such an entrepreneurial spirit. I think she's so proud of, her phase of this has been seeing mommy launch an organization. She was 10 months old when I started Generation Hope, and she's seen me grow the organization along with my team over the years. And so I think for her, that's been really cool to just see mom kind of trailblazing and wanting to blaze her own trail. And then we have 3 boys who I talk about in the book are like walking tornadoes. And for them, they don't care. They're like digging up worms and doing all sorts of other things. But they do know mommy's on TV sometimes, and they'll, sometimes take a break from playing to watch me. But I hope those are the lessons that they take from this too, to blaze their own trail and to fight for the things that they believe in.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Kids are so funny.
Yeah.
They're different stages, right? Okay, so this is a good question. What are the best ways that faculty can support student parents in individual courses?
Oh, love that question. I think one big thing, I talk about in the book, there's one story, and Heather, maybe you'll remember this, of a faculty. I was in a theater class, and my theater professor, my daughter, Narissa, she had walking pneumonia, and she had had it for several weeks, and it was the dead of winter. And I asked if I could miss a class to be home with her. And I think we were taking a test, or there was some major thing due. And my professor said no and told me that I would fail the class if I didn't bring her. And I had to walk with her in the snow, in the dead of winter with walking pneumonia, and have her sit on my lap, miserable, just so I could pass this class. And I wish I could tell you that that was not representative of what we see every day with student parents across the country, but it is. And I think faculty, especially, student facing professors, faculty, staff, have the opportunity to be game changers for student parents. One thing that we would love to see, and we provide, if you go to our website, generationhope.org, we have some great templates for professors, in particular, family-friendly syllabi. So a statement on your syllabus that says that you recognize and embrace the parenting responsibilities of students and welcome conversations to talk about, their experiences or their needs throughout the course of your class. In your welcome email, making it clear that you recognize the parenting responsibilities of your students. And I think also helping to change the conversation on campus. Higher ed is very much a survival of the fittest mentality, right? And if you can't hang, if you can't swing it, you don't belong in a college classroom. We have to get past the hazing mentality that is so pervasive in higher ed. And so I think any opportunity that you can model this behavior for your peers and really help to transform the culture within your institution, that speaks volumes and will help so many students.
Yeah, we actually have tried to get faculty. We have some language through our Title IX office at Mason for family-friendly syllabi. So awesome. We've been chipping away at that.
Yeah.
But in addition to like faculty treatment, how about your classmates? This is another audience question. How did your classmates treat you once they knew you were a mother? And you do talk about this in the book, and I think you formed some friendships with a couple of people, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I would say it was 50-50. I made an incredible group of girlfriends in college who, they were like, baby, yes, I love it. Like, let's do her hair and dress her up. And, they were so excited, and there's still just amazing supports to her today. But then I would also have students, if we were doing a group project and they wanted to meet at 8:00 in the library on campus, which by the way, was a building that I could never really go into because I had my daughter with me. I would disclose, hey, I'm a parent, I can't meet at that time. And I would often have students say, like, I don't care, like, this is when we're meeting and you need to figure it out. And so it really was a toss-up in terms of whether students would be supportive or helpful, or whether they would make it more difficult and not really be that understanding. And I think there is an opportunity, as we're thinking about, again, how do we change the culture on campuses to not only inform, faculty, staff about the importance of supporting student parents, but also informing the larger community, including students, about the fact that you may have a peer who is parenting, and the fact that things, like taking for granted that everybody can go study in the library at 8:00 at night, that those are things that may not be available to your peers, and how can you help to make accommodations for them? I think that's really important. And again, how do we change that culture?
Yeah, and I think that that comes up with event planning too on campuses. So oftentimes the student involvement office, like at Mason, is catering to the 18 to 24-year-old students and planning events and activities that are happening on campus in the evenings and on the weekends. And then that sort of leaves student parents feeling a little isolated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you hear from like your scholars about that? Like dealing with, like, how do they get involved on campus? How do they form communities or become part of that outside of the academic classroom part of being at a university?
I think for the most part, unfortunately, they're not. They're not getting connected on campus. We did a survey of student parents nationally, including students in our program, and about 40% of parenting students feel disconnected from their campus community. I mean, that's almost half, right? Like, so it's very difficult, as you said, when different activities and supports are set up in a way that is inaccessible to you as a caregiver. And so, you know, one of the things that we're doing, I was awarded a Black Voices for Black Justice Award last year, which was for leaders across the country who are addressing race equity. And this grant was for me to use in any way that I saw fit to really do this work. And one of the big things we're doing with that funding is we're doing a challenge among the students in our program where they get micro grants and they can create different projects and activities on their campuses that support and amplify, you know, student parents. And one of the goals is to help them get connected into that campus community. And we're asking, when they apply for those funds, we're asking them, have you ever been involved on your college campus? And we're anticipating that the vast majority of them, you know, will say no. So there's a lot of work that institutions have to do to connect with this group. And it starts with looking at everything that you do, including your events and your social activities, through the lens of parenting students and saying, is this realistic? You know, for a student who has to go and run and pick up their kids at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening, to be able to take part in and to participate in. And I think a key part of that is making sure that student parents are in the center of these decisions, right? Like, instead of us deciding for student parents what is accessible for them, including them around the table when we're talking and planning so that they're informing us, this is how this will really be impactful for this population.
Yeah, that's exactly what we found at Mason. And I'm going to give a shout out to the Office of Contemporary Student Services, which is a host of this event. And that's the office that serves student parents at Mason. And they're doing some amazing work and part of the Family U cohort we talked about. And I also want to acknowledge the Women and Gender Studies program. I'm a student in the program. They also have an amazing center in the Johnson Center, which is great space. It's family-friendly space. It's space for anyone who wants to just hang out. You can study there. There's a library. It's fabulous. And they've been big supporters of student parents on campus at Mason as well. So, Nicole, we don't have any other questions for you, but is there anything else that you want to share from the book that maybe we forgot to ask you about?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, one thing that I often say is that student parent work is racial justice work. And I think as many organizations, institutions, companies are really, you know, we've seen in the past year with the nation's racial reckoning, putting out equity statements, trying to prioritize race equity work and address disparities, that student parents have to be a part of that work. You know, we are not going to build back better. We are not going to come out of the experiences that we've had over the past year and a half in a better place if we don't start to really prioritize and value the educational accomplishments of teen parents and of parents in general. There's a lot of work to be done on this front, and understanding that this work is intimately connected to race is really important. And so I'm hoping that people walk away from the book. That's a big takeaway, that if you are committed to racial justice, then you have to be committed to student parent work and whether or not young families are thriving.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so I'm going to make one more plug for the book. There's the green button on your screen. If you, if you want to buy the book, you can buy the book. I think it's also available on Amazon.
Yes, anywhere books are sold. Yes.
Yes, it's been great chatting with you today, Nicole. I really appreciate all of the work that you're doing with Generation Hope, the work with your book, your continued work and partnership with George Mason University, your alma mater.
Yeah.
Don't tell William and Mary, but I know they also acknowledged you. I read a little, like, I think it was in one of the alumni magazines when I was doing some research. So congratulations on that and all of your accolades and more reviews to come.
Yes.
From future newspapers and yeah, it's just been really great to share with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.